Every now and then at Motorboat and Yachting we get the chance to do something a bit special, and today is one of those days. At around this time of year we like to do a Christmas boat test special using all the normal boat test techniques but on something very different. And today we are testing MGB 81. She is an original World War II motor gunboat built by the British powerboat company to go out and defend the British flotillas against attacks from German E-boats. And she has just been the subject of an extensive restoration here at the Burton Boat Yard, where she has been refitted with new engines. And we are going to be the first people to go out and test her. The original engines were Packard engines built in the US of around 1500 horsepower each. They were supercharged petrols. She's now been fitted with triple FPT C13s, new diesel engines of about 850 horsepower each, but that still should be quite powerful enough on a boat this size. So let's start them up and see how she goes. That's two. And that's the third engine. We've got all three engines running now on straight through exhausts, and I don't even know if you can hear me because it's pretty raucous back here, but imagine what it must have sounded like with triple V12 petrol engines. It sounds good enough with these. So there are triple engines. We've got two outside ones on V drives and then a central one on a straight shaft out the back. It's the only way they could fit the big V12s in such a narrow hull. And as you can see, she is a beautiful looking thing. It's the classic Hugh Scott Payne design with the beautiful sloping decks that help give it the rigidity it needs to perform. So it's beautiful, it's fast, and it's heavily armoured too. These were the gunboats, not the torpedo boats. So we've got a big 3-pounder gun on the foredeck. We've got the twin Oerlikon machine gun on the back. And then these two lightweight Lewis guns either side as anti-aircraft. And then the only explosive thing we've got are the depth charges down on the side decks. And rumour has it that in one particularly daring attack, the captain of the boat took it right under the bow of an oncoming German ship, let the depth charge out and exploded it right in its path and sank it. So that's the kind of thing these boats were used for. Not so much these days, but we've still got all the replica weaponry, and we're going to go out and see just what it's like to actually drive this incredible ship. This is quite an experience. It's not like any other boat I've ever driven. It's a completely different beast. We've got the triple gears, which take a huge amount of effort to get into gear, and you can just feel it kicking in, and even at 500 RPM it's doing 7-8 knots. And then we've got the triple throttles over on this side, which again require a decent amount of effort to get going. It only really starts to have any effect on the rudder once you're up to speed, because it's designed to be manoeuvrable at speed. And when I say manoeuvrable, it's a very relative idea, because to be honest, I've rarely driven a less manoeuvrable boat, but compared to the battleships and destroyers it was trying to attack, it's far more manoeuvrable. But we've only got half a turn of lock either side, and it takes an age for it to really start responding. And again, it's a huge amount of effort required. It's not too bad at this speed, but you'll see what happens when we throttle up. Let's give it a go. Start to feel it. The turbos are kicking in at about 1500 RPM. Give it more willy. Again, it's a very physical experience. And now there's another second boost at about 2000 RPM. You can really feel it starting to charge. We're doing 27, 28 knots now. We're still building. It'll go all the way up to 30, 31 knots. And now the rudder's really weighting up. It's a proper physical effort required. And the turning circle, it's about 100 meters wide at this point. So it takes a brave man to go in and attack a battleship on something like this. But really, it's just a magnificent experience. Looking at that big wake behind us, then the view over the foredeck and the beautiful shear line. It's just a privilege to drive something like this. So this is the aft gun on board MGB 81. It's a pair of Oerlikon heavy caliber machine guns mounted on a platform that swings round and elevates. And the gunner would sit here, you've got your sights here, line up with the enemy craft and give a burst of heli caliber machine gun fire, and then try and get out of there as fast as you possibly could. So as well as the twin Oerlikons on the aft deck, there are these Lewis guns on either side deck. They rise up on a strut so you can get your shoulders tucked in, and these were used predominantly for anti-aircraft fire, or indeed if you needed a lighter machine gun, one on each deck, so whichever side you are, you can always hit the enemy. The only explosive power on board are these depth charges. Unlike the motor torpedo boats, you were only really armed with guns, so if you needed to try and sink something bigger, the only way to do it was to get right up in front of the enemy's path, drop that in front of him and hope it explodes underneath the boat. Not an easy task, particularly given the manoeuvrability of this. And then there's the main gun on the foredeck, which is the 3-pounder. It's not a huge combat caliber, we're not talking a massive battleship gun, so you need to get in close. And when I say close, we're talking about within a couple of 100 yards. So the gunner sits in this chair here. The whole gun itself is mounted on a swivelling platform. You've got the elevation. There's a wave deflector wrapping right the way around it. And this is really the whole point of the motor gunboat. It's this big flat foredeck where the gun is mounted. It's all designed to give maximum strength and a nice flat platform so the gunner can do his job. This is the original navigation room, and you can probably see just how small everything is down here. The helm itself is all outside, so this is the only inside space with any kind of view at all. But what you have to remember is that when these were being used in anger, they were going out at night at 40 knots with basic navigation equipment, crossing the channel, getting involved in some kind of skirmish off the coast of France or Holland, and getting back all in the dark using basic navigation techniques and just this very small little wheelhouse to do it all from. It's amazing what they managed to do. What's really remarkable is just how small everything is. So coming back from the navigation station up forward in the wheelhouse, there's this tiny little corridor which my shoulders barely fit through, and I certainly can't stand up. And imagine trying to move around this boat at 40 knots in the dark. And here's the little radio room tucked under the helm. Again, I'd have to duck to get in and just about squeeze through. But this is where the radio operator would stay in communication with the shore. Because these were not boats where the crew was staying on board. They were billeted on shore and would just come out for their raids at night. There were 12 to 14 crew on board this. Everybody had their role, but they weren't living or sleeping on it. They were just using it purely as their attack craft. And then leading back from the radio room, we come into the ammunition store. So this little space will have been packed full of ammunition for the guns on board, and in particular the aft Oerlikon mounted on the deck just above us here. This gives you some idea of just how basic and physically uncomfortable this boat is. It's not a boat built for leisure, it's built for a very specific purpose. So just squeeze down this narrow ladder, which is the only access to the lower accommodation. And even when you get here, there's not a lot to it. We've got a crew room over here to starboard, the wardroom where the officers hung out, and then a very small basic galley down the middle. You can see why the crew had to be billeted ashore, because there simply isn't space on board to actually live here for any length of time. It's a basic piece of military machinery. You can see a little bit from these original plans how the hull shape came together. So you've got a relatively deep, narrow V up at the forefoot, and it flattens off aft to give that planing surface, which is what gave it the speed. It meant that they weren't terrific seaboats, in all honesty. They were built for speed. So with that flat stern, they would bang a bit. But it did mean that they planed relatively early and they went quickly. I think with the original engines, they were good for certainly at least 40 knots. But you can see the triple shaft and propellers, the outer two which are on V drives, and the central one direct shaft, and three relatively small rudders, which is what makes it such hard work to steer at lower speeds. And here you can see an example of the work that Berthans have been doing, recreating these frames using laminated strips of wood. You've got ash and yew which is a mahogany-like hardwood, which have all been clamped together. Every single frame has to be a little bit different to create that wonderful shape of the hull. There's an enormous amount of work involved, but it's the only way that they can recreate the original structure and the rigidity they need for it to perform as it does.
Right.
And here in the officer's wardroom is a lovely little bit of history that tells you all you need to know about these boats. This steel plate here was an emergency repair made to the hull after enemy gunfire ripped through this relatively thin mahogany outer casing. The gunfire ripped through, and in the space of 24 hours or however long it took, they rapidly patched it up with this metal plate. But imagine what it must have been like down here with gunfire coming through, knowing that right behind you are 3,000 litre tanks of highly explosive petrol. It gives some idea of how basic the boat is and how brave the men must have been who fought on her. Well, that has been the most extraordinary day. It's been an absolute pleasure and a privilege to go out and sea trial this motor gunboat, original World War II motor gunboat, and it's thanks to the Portsmouth Naval Base Property Trust, who are the owners of the boat, and in fact the Chancellor's LIBOR Fund, which has paid for the restoration of it, for all of us to enjoy this piece of heritage, not just as a static exhibit, but as a working boat that will be out and about demonstrating what those brave men did all those years ago. And for me, it's been an absolute privilege, and I hope what we've managed to do is convey some of the feeling and excitement of what it's like to drive this magnificent craft.